All right, Chris,
Get
let's get
rolling.
started.
Let's get rolling here. So I'm Chris Russell, your moderator for today. Joined, of course, by our host, Leah Daniels, COO of Jobsync. Also, Alex Murphy's on the call, CEO Jobsync, and Julie Kelly, our new CMO as well, is here. So welcome, Julie. All right, our topic today is candidate fraud in the hiring process with featuring Andrew Gadomski and Jason Roberts. We'll get to them in a second. Just a reminder, I'll post a replay of this to our YouTube channel by tomorrow. We'll email everybody a link to the replay in the coming days, and we'll get rolling here. So, Andrew and Jason, why don't you guys introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us what you do, who you are. Andrew, you go first.
No, I get to go first.
All right.
First, thanks everybody. Thanks Jobsync for hosting. I've run Aspen Analytics for now 20 years, and it's a human capital consulting people analytics organization. Really, the last few years has stayed focused in on cybersecurity, wage equity, and the use of artificial intelligence and the regulations. So that's quite a span, but it's really about safety and security. During that time, I also, for about 6 years, had the privilege of working for the executive branch and Department of Homeland Security, and specifically in building the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency. So I will admit that I'll probably have a viewpoint here that is very InfoSec oriented, not as much HR oriented.
Sounds good. Jason?
I'm not InfoSec. Uh,
All
uh, but what I will say is Andrew is the person that I call when I have a metrics problem, and also that I regularly go back and forth with on. So, what do you think about this crazy compliance scenario? So, super glad that he's joining in this conversation. We literally talk once a week, he and I. So this is
Yeah.
good.
And also had a podcast which
Former
or-
podcasters.
yeah,
Yeah,
which
we
About
used
which we're
to
technology.
overdue for
every once in a while. That's
every once in a
like
while.
it's built into the intro. Every once in a while we do this. So hi all, I'm Jason Roberts. I am well, I actually just changed jobs, so off the presses. It's not on LinkedIn or anything right
Oh,
yet. I
breaking
still
news.
work for Cielo, which is a great place, and I love, and I won't be leaving anytime soon. But I moved from being responsible for all of our technology and analytics to our client operations transformation and moving from traditional services business to an agentic business. So where we rely on agents to do big pieces of the work. So this is a transformation I think all of us are having to work through, and it's actually foundational to this topic as well. So that's the job, applying this stuff that I've been building all this time to our operating model. So that'll be fun for the next few years. It's a good time.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I
Amazing.
think Leah's going to start the conversation here by kind of defining what candidate fraud is here. So, Leah, take that away.
Well, a couple of just housekeeping things while I've got everybody. First, your cameras and mics are off, but we would love for you to turn them on and be part of the conversation. So please feel free to jump in, raise your hand, however you want to participate. Second, there is a chat. Please keep in mind we often have two conversations: the one that's happening here live, but also what's happening in the chat. And we will monitor that and pull comments out that folks are throwing in there. So please feel free to engage there as well. So we got talking about this candidate fraud thing because I am hearing candidate fraud, candidate fraud, candidate fraud, and then we ask questions and we're like, what does that mean? What is candidate fraud to you? And so I want to start with that question. What is candidate fraud? Like, how would you define it, Andrew? I'm going to start with you, and then Jason, you, and then we're going to go from there and sort of dig into two different things. What is candidate fraud and what do you do about it? But also what else is getting lumped into this definition and why? And what should we be thinking about on that broader topic? So let's start with candidate fraud, everyone.
Um, I tend to think in terms of cybersecurity because what we're talking about is some sort of digital breach or physical breach. And when you're doing that, and so the physical breach could be someone has shown up who is not who they say they are, and we don't know what their intentions are. It could be for money, it could be to breach security, it could be to breach data. And then we have individuals who are coming in and they are revealing themselves digitally. And like any other cybersecurity or infosec position, I tend to look at it not as one word. I'm sorry, everybody. I know that candidate fraud has been bundled together, but in an infosec world, this is misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. And I'm happy to go through each one of those. But the way that we're experiencing what we're seeing is people are accidentally misleading. They are they are deliberately putting themselves in trying to lead us and be disingenuous or provide disinformation, which is information that is not theirs, and they're doing it deliberately, or they're providing information that is malicious. They have every kind of intent to steal something, and they have steal something or position. They have no reason to work for you. That is not what they want to do. And if they do work for you, it is to exploit your data, exploit your physical infrastructure. But that's how I look at fraud in terms of a candidate.
Right, you, Jason.
Mine is it's very simple. I think it's about misrepresentation. It's misrepresenting who you are, where you are, what you have done, and why you're there. So those are the buckets in my mind. So who you are, you have these scenarios where people will interview for another person, where they say that they're one person, but they're actually a bad actor, maybe. So misrepresenting themselves. You even got the crazy ones where one person will interview for a job, and then another person shows up for the job. So that's a shady one that's happened before. Where you are, I've personally had this happen to me, where a person interviewed for a job saying they were based out of the US, they were in the US, and turns out they totally weren't. And we caught that through we had hired them, brought them on board, and then noticed through their IP activity that they weren't where they said they were going to be. Um,
Where
so
were they?
represented themselves as a US national when they were not. Um, what you've done is saying that you have experience that you don't have, saying that you've worked in a place that you haven't, something like that. So what you've done and misrepresenting your skills and capabilities. And while you're there, there are people now who apply for jobs and take jobs not because they are wanting to go to work for that company. They're wanting to steal information from that company in one way or another. So those are the buckets of what I think fraud is. Here's what it is not, though. It is not using AI to customize your resume, because I presented at a really great conference a little bit ago, the USA Today Best Workplaces conference, and somebody said, "Oh, my hiring managers are rejecting these candidates that have applied, and they're rejecting them because they're using AI to customize their resume." And I was like, "Man, if somebody didn't use AI to customize their resume at this point, I would start to wonder if they can function in the current environment. Like, you need to be able to do this thing,
Hmm.
and
Wouldn't you
it's
want them in their work environment if there's a place for them to use AI and make themselves better, more efficient, quicker? You would celebrate that in the work environment.
if they can, it's a huge problem. That's like in schools right now. They in schools for the longest time. I don't know if they're currently doing it. My daughter is at OU, the Oklahoma OU, not the Ohio OU. So she's at OU, and for the longest time they had these AI blocks. They would block anything that you used AI for, and you couldn't use AI on their through their networks. And I think that's the wildest thing. I think that makes no sense, because when people are replacing other people, I don't think AI is going to replace your job. I think someone using AI is going to take over your job. And if you're not teaching kids in school how to effectively do that, that's a problem. So I think everybody ought to use AI to make themselves better. And at this point, I'm questioning, do you really want to hire somebody that hasn't gone that extra mile?
Yeah. Jason, if I could back on that. So when you're using artificial intelligence to go ahead and alter your resume, pare it down, try to match in the language. The reason why I add misinformation to what I look at in terms of fraud is people tend to think that that's wrong, that you shouldn't do it. Or what ends up happening is that the artificial intelligence hallucinates and it then by accident says something that misrepresents you. It's not there's no malice behind it and it wasn't necessary it wasn't to fool you. But
Yeah.
in some cases, individuals are using bots that have high automation, high volume. And when you have high automation and high volume, just assume that a percentage of the submissions are going to have error with no malicious or disingenuous intent. And right now, I think what we're seeing is people say, well, that's fraudulent. No, it might be misleading by accident or a passing of misinformation, but don't just assume because they use AI and there's an error that they did it to defraud you.
Yeah, I think that's true, especially the automated systems. Like there's a an iOS app that's basically swipe right and it applies for you. So it'll bring up jobs and you swipe, it does the application, and you just move on to the next one. And it's customizing your resume for each one. Well, you're not looking at that customization before it gets submitted.
Right.
And I think that that's still on the candidates. If they submit a fraudulent resume and they get hired based on that fraudulent resume, then they can still be fired because they misrepresented themselves on their resume. I mean, still to this day, that's been the case forever, and I don't think
Right.
that changes now. I think there's a higher risk for them if they're not paying attention of putting themselves in a bad position.
One of the commenters just said that, Jason, is that they have to have the attention, and I think that's an example of the human in the loop. If you can
Yeah.
prove that you're looking at what you're submitting, but you also admit, hey, if there's a mistake on something I've submitted and I've reviewed it now that we're having the interview, you can go ahead and say, that was not deliberately misleading. I've now caught the error of what was sent to you. And I used automation to go ahead and send my information to you. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. It's just let's have the honesty that we need because then we're not trying to put a fraudulent face on things.
Yeah.
Andrew, if somebody said you have to have experience of doing X or doing Y minimum threshold, but you didn't, and the AI actually said that you did, and then that's why you're in the room wasting that person's time, is that like where like there's a spectrum, right? Like where maybe a slight embellishment versus a misrepresentation versus something where it's like, AI, please rewrite my resume so I'm a good match. And Jason calls me back for a face-to-face interview so I can convince him to hire me. Where is that line there in terms of where it actually starts to become fraudulent versus just a casual mistake?
Here's an example. What you're talking about is disinformation. So you have not controlled the AI, but you've allowed it to create embellishments or to execute the match beyond your set of filters and controls. And you're letting it happen, right? You have done that, and then once you're involved, you have clearly gone from misrepresenting to yourself, which is more by accident, to allowing disinformation to pull you forward. When Jason or another person was to reach out to me, that correction should be made. Absolutely, they should. You should, if you've applied via AI, you should be asking for a copy of the resume that the individual is looking for, or you should go into the profile and say, oh, before they interview me, what did the AI say about me? And then you can fess up, Alex. I think that you've got to have the humanity in the loop so you can avoid the intention and then the misread. Hopefully that kind of addresses what you're talking about. And it is that fine line, but again, humanity in the loop.
I think the
Yeah.
problem that we're all faced with right now is that we have a disenfranchised group of people who are applying for jobs,
Hmm.
right? The majority of the ones that you see moving towards these AI apply bots are because we have taught them it's a numbers game. You need to apply for 1,000 jobs to get one. And so they are participating in the game in the most efficient way they can find, which has some negative consequences in that, I talked to someone this morning. She said she was interviewing someone. She asked them about their HubSpot experience, said all over the resume how much HubSpot experience they had. And the poor person she was talking to was like, what? And then she watched her in the Zoom try to recover instead of just admitting the AI did it. She was like, well, and she's like Googling things and trying to basically cover for the lie. So that, I think, is where the misinformation or the embellishment of the AI and what you're talking about, Andrew, this is actually about the character of the person now, which is a really interesting element, right? That they have the wherewithal to admit to it.
Jason, are
And
Cielo
correct it.
clients experiencing that a lot? Do you have any stories about that?
So I'll tell you what we're experiencing. There's significant increase in the number of applications for every job, and and this is across all of our clients, uh, even smaller clients. We're seeing this, like people who aren't brand names. Like we have some that are household name clients, but even the smaller ones where we have to help them out with their employer brand, they're getting a ton of applicants they normally wouldn't have gotten. Those applicants uh, are not always even reasonable fits on paper. Like even it's just spam malicious these days. Like it's everywhere. There's spam all over the place.
Hashtag that.
Yeah, hashtag candidate spam malicious. I don't know. Um, so when so what do you how do you deal with that? Well, there's great technology that allows you to sort resumes. It's existed since the days of Monster, where your default view was relevance, right? It wasn't recency, it was relevance on Monster back in the day. And all of our ATSs have that as a default view that you can use. So the candidate looks like to the technology is the best fit, those candidates go to the top, and the worst fits go to the bottom, right? Well, except if they're using AI to customize their resume, then that's going to the top. We're in an arms war. This is an arms race between candidates and companies. And what happened is companies started using the technology to make it a little easier to deal with all these applicants. Candidates were like, "Ha ha! I see what you're doing," and they raised us one AI customization. The big trick here, I think, if we're talking about fraud, I actually don't mind it. The big trick, though, is did you lie? Is all this true? Did everything that came across my desk turn out to be the right thing? And there are some of the tools that are out there that they use that are better than others. And so I built a tool that has a few users. It's not huge. That is for candidates, just personally, not a Cielo thing. For candidates to customize their resume. And I built an agent that checks the agent to make sure nothing in the new resume uh, is different than the old resume because it would hallucinate like crazy if I didn't do that. Well, a lot of the tools aren't doing that. A lot of the technologies aren't doing that. So, and they don't necessarily prioritize the fraud thing. And it's just because I'm a recruiting nerd that I care about that a little bit more. But if you're just somebody out there hoping to get somebody the maximum number of interviews because that's how they'll judge the success of working with your product that help them customize their resume, that's not necessarily what you're trying to focus on. So it's a tough time. So we're seeing tons of resumes. Um, Most are showing up as not very relevant. The ones that are relevant, we go into interviews. Sometimes we run into the dodgy ones where it's customized in the wrong way. Um, I think we have to find a better way to deal with application volume than what we have right now. On the other side, you've got candidates. What candidates are telling us is that they feel like they're constantly ghosted. They don't have a shot when they apply for a resume. When they apply for um, a job is posted on Indeed, and an hour later, there's 100 and some odd applicants already. So how do you have any sort of shot when that happens as an applicant? So when you have to apply to 200 jobs to get hired, and it's more now, by the way, but the last actual stat that came out, the scientifically laid out stat, was 0.5% of applicants are hired, which means uh, 1 out of 200. So you're
Hmm.
applying for 200 jobs to get hired. You're going to do some stuff to try to make your chances better.
Wait,
And it's not always just a volume game. You got to play a little bit smarter.
And Jason,
then
I think it's also there's this authenticity and significant interest in working for a particular employer or brand. I really want to work there. I've heard very good things. They're a top workforce. You and I were at that conference together, and I
Mhm.
think it's fair to say that those companies probably want to continue to be a top workforce. But how genuine is your interest when you're using artificial intelligence and the one-click apply, and you are applying to 200 roles because we have the statistic, but the reality is that do you have the same level of authenticity and interest in the number five company versus the number six company? You probably don't. And
Yeah.
I think that if you were to apply to 200 companies, if you were filtering, you would probably need to look at 1,000 companies to get to the 200 to have a level of authenticity. And now what we've got is we don't know how authentic the application is. And in
Mhm.
addition, people are applying to multiple jobs at a company and having hiring managers compete with each other on a candidate. And that's not new, but it certainly is amplified.
Well, so what that points to me is a degradation in the value of the application. So the application was always the indication of interest, and it may not be an actual indication of interest anymore.
Hmm.
So that's what I thought of when you were talking. It's, you're always looking for QIAs. The reason applicants are always so interesting is that you can judge how qualified they are based on the resume that they send you. You know they're interested and somewhat available because they've applied, right? So that's super interesting. And hey, you have a conversation to clarify qualifications, and you're off to the races. So applicants are way better for us as recruiters than people we actually cold source because we can see if someone's qualified, but we have to work through that whole interested available piece along the way,
Yeah, we're gonna
right?
have like a second level of application now going forward. I mean, that sounds like we're headed there.
I don't know what it is. I think that it's certainly, you can imagine if you're a person that's just spam applying to jobs and you get an outreach that says, "Hey, thanks for your application. We'd love to talk to you." They're having to go back and say, "Okay, what job is this? And do I really want it?" Whereas before, the only ones they applied to were the ones that they wanted. So it's a different model, and we're gonna have to figure out how to work in that model, I think.
there's
Yeah,
another
there's some
party in here.
technology that I've been working with that offers a level of let's call it seriousness or investment, where an individual does a short application and an AI voice-based agent calls them right back and then interviews everybody.
Yeah.
25 minutes. And if at any time during that 25 minutes you're talking about this is what the job is, this is how much we're going to pay, these are to the type of experiences and so on. If you're not interested after hearing all this, or you believe that the questions that we're asking aren't appropriate for you, hang up.
Yeah. Are you interested in the next step? Like, tell us, right? Indicate that
Yeah.
interest. Yeah. I like it.
One of
Yeah.
the things that we're not talking about right now is a third party in here, which are the companies building these bots to begin with. Yes, you can build your own. You go on Reddit, find out how to build one. I'm actually going to take that group out for lots of
Hmm.
reasons. There's a certain level of commitment to building the bot that I have to respect. But if you're spending the $100 to go get yourself a bot, they have an interest in keeping you as a customer on your monthly plan,
Yeah.
which means they actually have not an interest in you getting a job. Because the minute you get a
Well,
job, you're no longer paying them.
they have an interest in getting you interviews
Yes.
because you need to have success, right? So they have an interest in generating interest for you. Um, Now, how truthful, how good that is, I don't know. But
I,
They that is their job.
Yeah.
I
It,
took a
it will
minute and
be
went through
interesting
50 of them.
when, yeah, I'm
Oh,
sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
I was gonna say I went through 50 of them, of these bots, and looked at
Oh
the
yeah?
founders. Only one of them even had a recruiting background. Of
Okay.
50 that I found,
Was it my bot?
it was not your bot. I did not
It
look
was
at your
not my
bot.
bot. Okay.
Oh, I need to go back to go look at your bot now.
There you go.
I looked on, the Google Play Store, the Apple Play Store. I went through all of
Yeah.
the ways that you Google it, all the stuff. What was super interesting is the ones that are monthly plan versus one time, the
Hmm.
ones that rewrite your resume every time, the ones that can answer free form questions versus the ones that cannot, right? Because
Yeah.
there are a lot of those. Um, but more importantly, the ones that called me later, like at some point, just because they find me in the ecosystem and try to sell me candidates.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
So now we
Well,
have that element too. They're trying to operate like a third party
I
job
kind of
board
like
that's trying to
that.
sell candidates.
Well, so I like that. I think that's actually where we ought to go. So
Yeah,
where this ought to be, and remember when your buddies would call you up and say, "Hey, I need to find a new job. Do you know any good recruiters that I can work with to find me a new job?" Because they thought recruiters worked for candidates to find them jobs. That was the expectation that people had, that the recruiter was your agent out there, your talent agent that would help you find your next gig. It's not usually the case. It's the case in very rare, very niche skill sets, but not usually the case. So, I mean, we all know this, right? Well, what if the technology gets good enough where the you can have an agent that is your agent, that
that's
is
right.
that is looking for the jobs that you want and applying for those jobs on your behalf. Yeah,
Siri,
it's
yeah,
it's way
Siri, I want a new
better.
job.
Yeah. What?
Siri, I want
Gary,
a
I
new
want a new
job.
job.
Yeah, Sierra, I want
Yeah,
a new job. And then, but I think that's a better way to do it. It's actually what I was hoping I could do, but I wasn't smart enough to build it. Um, that is the way that the world ought to go, because we're gonna have more and more agents that are reviewing the resumes, deciding who gets to an interview, and just basically have the candidate's agent talk to the company's agent, and ultimately their job is to make the best possible match so the interview will be as successful, that human contact, that first human interaction, is as successful as it can be.
yeah.
There are key human moments here in the process, and those will remain in the process, I think, going forward. um, Judgment related tasks are not going to be automated by AI, right? So we keep judgment doing what it's doing. um, so that interview, I think, is always going to be a human. You're always going to have a human hiring manager interview at some point. I know there are a bazillion AI interviews. Those are pre-screens. That doesn't count. AI is not making a decision on who gets hired or not and who progresses to a broader set of interviews. That is still a human moment that we have to protect in the end. So if we just had an agent, if candidates had an agent that could represent them and get them to that human moment, and it's making really good matches, that would be the ideal state. We're really
Yeah.
far from that right now, but I would love that world.
I think that that is exactly where it's going to go, is you're going to have some level of subscription that says, I'm going to constantly have this agent, because the agent doesn't have to engage 100% with an employer. The agent can just be saying, how are you feeling? How is the job that you're working with? Do you like your boss? Do you want me to poke around? And, or you're coming up on your third year. Do you feel like you're in a position to be promoted or not? Do you, and you might say, yeah, I'm not kind of digging it. Why don't you go around and see what's out there? Meanwhile, what that agent is doing is talking with 300 companies, 400 companies, and saying, I've got somebody, who's the most placeable candidate. By the way, for those of you who are in contingent or executive search from a long time ago, you know what an MPC is. And this agent will just go ahead and do that for you and constantly bring you opportunities until such time that you can actually hone the algorithm where it will probably bring you less and higher relevance. And that's fine. I think that that's a wonderful concept. And I think actually this might be the new outplacement. When
Yeah.
an organization reduces, I wouldn't be surprised if they automatically give you access to some of the tools that you were talking about, Leah, and say, we're going to pay for this and see if we can get you hundreds of jobs because, unfortunately, we're downsizing or we merged or whatever, but we're going to do everything we can. Well, that may not be going to an office and having them pay $4,500. It could just be $100 a month for the next year.
So Jerry said something in the chat. He said if you're willing to interview everyone via agentic interview, you don't necessarily need their application, only their expression of interest that can be part of authentication. I ag I agree with that. In fact, we've actually started down that path a little bit on my side. So we're tinkering with this idea of not necessarily not capturing the resume. We're still capturing the resume, but why do we need to pre-screen a resume? Why not just send everybody straight into that agentic interview and go forward? I'll tell you
Are
the
we
problem
thinking
right
about
now is they're pricey.
yeah,
Um,
the cost? I was going to ask you, are you thinking about it through the lens of how much it costs to run an AI voice? Because they're not cheap.
yeah, they're pricey. The agentic interviews are pricey. The first one I saw was I now mind you, this is a little while ago. It's becoming a bit commoditized at the moment, so that's good for me. But the first one I saw, somebody put a price out there was like 2.5 times my actual cost of an interview because I know down to the minute how long a phone screen takes and what my cost for a phone screen is because that's the business I'm in. And it was the for the AI one, it was 2.5 times the human cost, and I was like, no, I can't do that. That's probably
Yeah.
not going to work for me.
Barry Hurd just mentioned regulation as part of the automated AI and interview everybody. And that's actually a pretty sophisticated problem that I'm dealing with, which is the decision tree where you have to ask in the individuals where they're located, what is their intention, do they need reasonable accommodations, do you quickly move from an AI voiced interview to automatically moving to American Sign Language and those types of things. These are real things that we have to think about, and we're moving so fast by just remixing something out of Lovable that, oh, well, we're going to go ahead and do this. Well, no, you can't just do that. That's why we have these regulations, and some of these regulations are old. This is not, oh, we created it or it just got passed by a state legislature. Whether it was the FICRA being called up or Title VII, these are been on the books a long time.
And Illinois has had an AI interviewing law, I think longer than any state has had any regulation in AI, right? And most people don't even know about it. But
Yeah,
there is
facial
That's the higher view
recognition.
law. That law exists for higher view, almost exclusively.
specifically
It,
specifically
Yeah,
because of higher
yeah.
view.
Jason and I did a podcast about that years ago, and we both called it voodoo.
yeah. At the time, what they were doing, because they were doing all the weird, like, oh,
Yeah,
we
I
can read
remember
your
this.
facial expressions, and I was like, that's total voodoo. They are not. That's not real.
Today?
Well,
I
let's
don't
just say
know.
the lawsuits were real.
Yeah, the
Well,
lawsuits are
yeah,
real.
Pay
yeah.
for it.
Well, anybody that tried it, do so at your own peril. That's
That's right.
Jason, speaking of
unwise.
vendors, a lot of these new ATSs are coming out with identity fraud verification checks, stuff like that. Are you seeing a lot of that? What's your overall take on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I've seen a few of them. Some of them are really interesting. There's some that are just built into some of the tech that um, just a clever addition, right? So I think Hire Easy had a nice, clever little addition that they made on theirs that I thought was good. Um, there have been a couple of passes at blockchain uh, efforts that I'm hoping somebody figures that out at some point. And the identity verification, I like the idea of it. The problem is it's a really difficult barrier. If you've done some of these identity verification things, um, you go through these deals where you're scanning a
Your license.
ID and you're showing your picture and there's always some glitchy weirdness in there. It's time consuming and it's annoying. And what I'm worried about as a recruiter who is interested in pipeline. is that we'll have such massive drop off from that process
Yeah.
that it'll become a problem. I love the idea of it. We want legit people showing up, and I think at marquee brands you should do that. Like my last job was JP Morgan Chase. We had so many applicants. Yeah, it probably makes sense for somebody like them. They're also at higher risk of fraud and bad actors coming in. So a place like that, sure, do that all day long. I can't believe they haven't done it yet. There are other places where, if you're this lady that we talked to last week gets 1,000 applicants for every single job. Um, this is the one Andrew and I were in a room with. 1,000 applicants for every single job. Uh, a company you've never heard of, like the equivalent of um, not quite Acme Brick Company or something. And all their jobs are remote. So it's
Oh,
all
that's why.
digital.
Yeah.
Everything's digital. So
Right.
for her, I don't think the identity verification makes sense because there's no one like targeting necessarily the people with really negative intentions. I think that's the ones you want to go to that level of effort for. Also, we see a ton of interview fraud in other outside of the US. There's a lot more interview fraud. So India, we have a real problem with that, and we have to be really careful. So I think an identity verification there. I haven't seen an India-based solution for that yet, but I would do that probably if I had the chance.
The
Yeah. Jason, you and I have talked about the analog concept time and again.
Yeah,
And
this is the one. This is why I told Chris he should have you on here. This idea.
so when you think about financial services, there's a number of analog concepts and a number in healthcare, there's a number of analog concepts that we have forgotten about. So the first is in the financial services market, there are credit services that automatically will use paper to communicate with individuals who are applying to mortgages or they are looking for different kinds of checking solutions. And the only way to communicate with that organization is to revalidate your address using the US Postal Service or whatever your postal service is. And then in this case, you can actually take the resume that you applied with and you can send it back. Well, why would I do that? Because you can't execute it in volume if you're a cyber actor. It's almost impossible. They deal with that. Another analog concept that we talked about, which is going to blow everybody's mind, is the idea of using a fax machine. And literally, right, literally
Bring
going and
back the
saying,
facts.
we are interested in you, but you have to validate your location, which is area code oriented. It's impossible to almost spoof it. And at the other one that I've come up with, and we're using geospatial to execute this, is someone applies to a hospital or they apply somewhere that's a local. What we're asking is go to that place within the next 24 hours and check in using your mobile device. And you can do that just for, say, hotels. You can use the top four brands of hotels. There's going to be a hotel within probably 10 miles of where you're sitting. Now, all of these things are analog oriented, and we've never really talked about them in terms of recruitment, at least not necessarily in my tenure, until we had fax machines and people were sending in their resumes by mail to companies, and you would have a stack of them. But there's nothing wrong with going analog. My folks still have a house phone, on cable.
But do you?
But
But do
but it
you?
works when the lights go. It works when the grid goes down. It
Do you
works.
though? Do you have a house phone?
No,
How about a fax machine? Andrew, you got a fax machine?
I have the ability to fax, but only electronically, but it's not a phone number. It's
Yeah.
it's a phone number that's not localized.
So what I love about this, I love the idea of the analog solution to this problem. Um, if if you're a store and I own a brick and mortar comic shop, and in order to verify that I was who I was and that my shop was where it is, Google, the most digital of all companies, sent me a postcard and it had a code on it. And I had to enter that code
I
into a
remember that.
site to
Yeah.
prove that I was this person. Amazon does the same thing. So
Yep.
they're using mail, like straight up postcard mail, to verify that you are where you say that you are. I think that's a pretty great solution.
Yeah.
I think that's really great to apply to our recruiting problem and verifying again. One of the fraud levels I said who you are and where you are, that solves the where you are really cleanly.
Really cleanly.
So
Yeah.
Unless
there's
you,
there
unless you get a PO box, then somebody go pick it up from there.
Now you
well, I
just
was
say
gonna
no
say
PO boxes.
there's this old saying about I shouldn't, maybe it's not old, but like you have two people in a forest on a hike. They encounter a bear. One of them stops, puts it on, takes their running shoes out, puts their running shoes on. The other person says, "What are you doing? You can't outrun the bear." You're like, "Fair enough, but all I have to do is outrun you."
Yep.
And so a lot of the candidate fraud chase is outrunning everybody else because like the woman that was sentenced to 50 years in prison last year in Arizona, that scheme, which was putting, if everybody doesn't know, there was a gigantic bust, North Korean identity theft,
Yep.
something like 80 or something workers of stolen identities from people in the US on the payroll, generating revenue from Fortune 500 companies because they were getting paid into a bank account that she opened in their name in Arizona, and she would have happily put in that code from the postcard, right? But like the reality is, if you did that with her, she probably wouldn't bother because she can just go on to the next sucker.
Yeah.
That's right.
A lot of this
It
is
is
about outrunning everybody else.
it is about, and I appreciate the technologies that check the IP addresses and execute these secondary validations and look at, well, was the email address made in the last 20 minutes? I'm not discounting that. I think that there's a number of technologies that are doing that. I will tell you that cyber actors are smarter than you. North Korea, Iran, Russia, secondary regimes who really want to go ahead and apply to 10,000, 100,000, a million transactions are going to get around that technology until it goes ahead and penetrates and breaches. So I appreciate the services that are out there, but they'll figure out how to get around those things and they'll stay ahead if they really want to.
Thinking about that, actually, let's just continue down the path of bad actors and malactors, right? One of you mentioned at the beginning about one candidate interviews, another one shows up. I had one phone interview one time and a different person showed up for the actual interview, the physical one. And I remember talking to
Nice.
this person, thinking to myself, the voice intonation is wrong, the like speech patterns are wrong. So I just asked, and he copped to it, said he hired somebody because he wasn't getting any interviews. This is early 2000s, so like this is a long time ago, and this behavior isn't new. It's just I think we're talking about it more than we used to.
Yep.
Yeah, people used to do it for the SATs. Remember that?
I was on a call and somebody said
Yeah.
that because they do all video interviews, that the candidates are now required to license at the front of the camera at the beginning of the call. But even at that, now we're starting to see AIs that could build that for you if you wanted.
Isn't this the whole premise of Suits? That TV show Suits? That was the guy's job, is he would
Yeah,
take the bar exam for people.
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm pretty
And-
sure that was
yeah.
that was
That
that
was-
whole
And
show.
Leah, we were talking about it earlier. I mean, I could go ahead and apply for a job, and then Chris Murdoch shows up.
Well, yeah, I mean, but you are the same person, so it doesn't that's fine.
Right?
That's totally allowed.
Right. So, but there is this distance that naturally occurs between a recruiting organization and a person of interest because they're not necessarily, digitally they're distant. And then from an insider threat perspective, someone might show up to the interview who is not the person that you screened. And as much as I would love to tell you that their intentions are only about data manipulation or social engineering, there is a physical and infrastructure threat that we are just not talking about. And there are really good examples. Just recently, there was a gentleman, and I wouldn't call him a gentleman. It was certainly someone who had mental issues, but went ahead back to work and put the entire warehouse on fire. And it was absolutely a threat, and they didn't pick up on it. And I think that we're tending to say, well, someone's trying to defraud us just to get data. Someone might be trying to defraud us to do something else. And that's very scary. We all have returned to work, by the way. People are showing up to work again. It's not like we're all digital and sitting at home.
Yes, but I don't advocate return to the office. So if somebody asked, does this further validate in-person work environments? No, no, no. I've done very well just working right here. This is Club Jason. It's working for me.
I will say though, the employers that I talk to, the ones that have a mostly work from home, definitely have a heightened sense of this problem of volume per job, right? That remote only option seems to generate more activity, probably because it opens the world up to more options. It would do that anyway.
Well, two
But
things happen, right? People want that more. There are more people who want fully remote. So if your workforce wants that, why would you not give it to them? It costs you less money. And the second thing is that uh, it opens you up to a much broader pool of candidates. You're not limited geographically in candidates.
right,
You have this broad group. So, my thought is as a business, we're going down a completely different rabbit hole here. But my thought is as a business, if your employees like it, uh, you get the same productivity or better, which look at the GDP, the amount of things produced by the United States when everybody was working from home was higher at that point. There are no companies I know of that indicated they had lower productivity in their filings because people were working from home. It makes no sense to force people to spend that extra time commuting into an office outside of
Your former
collaborative
CEO
efforts.
has a very public rant about wanting more efficiency and more less Zoom time for the common employee while watching the efficiency in terms of revenue per employee skyrocket. How do you
Yes.
square that reality of the CEO demanding everybody come back with the reality of the data doesn't support it?
So that's my former CEO, and yes, there's a reason that company is my former, but
Is the former.
yeah, but here's how I swear it. In that case, um, that particular CEO had a multi-billion dollar building that he was building in the middle of Manhattan that would have looked pretty silly if he didn't have people come and sit in it at some point. So he had a little bit also um, all of the banking in the world, all of the regional banks in the US at least. Um, think about regional banks. They don't have car loans, not a lot. They don't have a lot of credit cards. So how do they make money? Banks make money by loaning you stuff, money. So they've got some mortgages, but it's mostly commercial real estate.
Yeah.
If commercial real estate crashes, all of the regional banks go, and none of the bankers want that. So they're going to keep pushing you to go use the commercial real estate.
Yeah. Leah, if I could kind of just
That was
add
total
something.
conspiracy, Jason, kicking in
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
It just
I'm gonna
sounds like sage advice, which is follow the money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
follow the money. I'm gonna pivot a bit. One of the things that we asked for, when the Candidate Experience Awards and the Talent Board got created the better part of 15 years ago, it was, hey, we got to make this easier, we got to make this better, we got to change the friction, we got to change the experience, and we got everything we wanted, right? We got
yeah,
the one-click apply and swipe right and all the stuff, right? We got everything we wanted. And now the question is, why haven't we made changes as recruiting organizations to compensate for that? So most applicant tracking systems, okay, excuse me, there are applicant tracking systems that will automatically shut off the job once a certain candidate threshold has been met.
very
Okay.
cute.
So they no longer can accept it, and it says, thank you for trying to apply. We have enough applicants. Another thing that I haven't seen, and I'm not saying it's not out there, I haven't seen every ATS, is why aren't we going ahead and reviewing individuals based on the timestamp in which they go ahead and apply? If I apply to one job at 12 o'clock and I apply to another job at the same company at 1 o'clock, then we're only going to look at the one at 12 o'clock until you're dispositioned, and then we're going to move to the 1 o'clock. And that's another methodology, which is saying no competing. The third one is this whole idea of, we have the no competing, we have the first thing, and now I'm forgetting what the third thing was, but we haven't made a lot of, it's closing jobs. If a job is open for so many days and you don't see the people, or it's too many and you think it's defrauded, tell everybody that we haven't gotten the applicants that we need, close the job without a hire. And I know what people are going to say, Andrew, that's going to bust up my time to fill. Just don't include it in your time to fill average. Time to fill is from the time you start to the time you offer accept. And if there's no offer accept, it's not going to show up. Close jobs and reopen them. And then if someone has applied to the first one, they don't get to apply to the second. I don't know why those three things aren't happening, especially in this environment.
Well, so I know a little bit of why people aren't doing it. One, there's a couple of reasons that I've run into because this is my starting point with our teams when they start complaining about volume of resumes. I say, all right, did you configure the shut off on of the posting when you hit a certain threshold of applicants? Almost nobody does this, by the way. Most people aren't doing it. Um, so if they haven't, I ask them to do it. The pushback that I get from our clients, some of our clients are still very proud of their database, right? So they'll be like, "Oh, we've got X million resumes in our database," and they're very proud of this. So it actually uh, is concerning to them to get fewer applicants per ad or per post or whatever, and they want to get that volume in, but nobody ever uses the volume, so I don't know why they're doing it.
It's a
But
vanity
that's
metric. It makes them feel good.
they are very I've literally had this conversation just this week, where I said just don't do that, and they said they really love the number of applicants that they get on these jobs, so we've got to keep doing it. So those are my primary things that I run into. They either don't know how to do it or they love having a huge number of applicants come in. Candidates hate it, man. They just despise the situation where they're applying. They feel like they're being ghosted. They do not like this at all.
They are being ghosted, which is why they feel like they're being ghosted.
Yeah,
They are being ghosted a
Yeah.
lot.
yeah. They took the time. They asked AI to customize their resume. They applied. They did their
They
whole
paid the
thing.
$120 for that AI tool that Jason built.
Not mine.
They
It was
applied to 1,000 jobs knowing they're only going to get one, and they're only going to get a handful of interviews, and that they're going to bust time for, they're going to create a market for fraudulent subscriptions. They're going to create a market for artificial intelligence screening. I think that if you are in that space, you should be shaking the hand of every ghosted candidate out there because they are fueling how you are making money.
You forgot the part where the AI bot that they're using is based out of a country in which there is no data protection laws. You forgot that part.
Yeah.
So their
Have you
data is being
seen,
sold too. That's a lot of PII.
speaking of super shady companies, have you seen Final Round? Final
No,
Round AI?
I've heard
Oh,
they got
no.
funding. I heard, yeah.
Yes, people just threw money at them. And their CEO is is really, really anti-establishment. Like he got kicked out of two schools. And he's like, they say to do this. Why bother? So his whole shtick is he has, you know how when you're sharing your screen, the Zoom window, you can't see the Zoom window. You can see what's behind the Zoom window,
Yeah.
or Teams or whatever you use, right? Well, what's on your screen isn't necessarily what everybody sees. They figured out how to take that layer and put an AI there. So it's listening to the interview questions, presenting answers in that invisible layer. Even if you're the candidate sharing their screen, it doesn't show up on the employer side. So
it's like
this final
annotating
round
it
thing, it's
basically. Wow.
super shady.
Yeah,
Voodoo.
that's interview cheating right there. It sounds
It's
like.
cheating. It's
Yeah.
100% cheating. And the CEO of this company was interviewed, and he goes, "Well, companies cheat all the time. They're doing all things that he doesn't like, whatever they are." So he goes, "I think it's fine for candidates to cheat too. Everybody's cheating."
Is there anything that you guys wanted to touch on before I noticed that we're 3 minutes?
We have
So
3 minutes, and I was going to give you your chance to give your final statement on candidate fraud, what you should do about it, and whatever else you can throw in there.
mine is to take this outside of HR for more than a minute. If you are a CHRO, a head of talent acquisition, you should know the first name of your chief information security officer. You should know who the representatives are that you have for your third party cybersecurity and make this an InfoSec problem. I appreciate that it's a candidate flow problem, that it is a fraudulent problem, and you feel like you're being portrayed. One of the first actions is you're not the only one who's being leveraged financially, infrastructure wise. It's not limited to recruitment. Use the assets that you already have for other parts of the organization.
My final thought is define fraud as fraud. So, not using AI isn't fraud. In fact, you want people who know how to use AI to work for you. Um, think about what it's like for the candidates and try to maximize the experience of those candidates. If you're just doing things like Andrew mentioned, the number one solve that everybody can do right now in your ATS, and that's trigger the limit on the number of applications once you hit a threshold. If you just do that, everyone's happier. You're happier because you're not dealing with as much garbage coming in. The candidate's happier because they're less likely to get ghosted. If we as an industry just turn those on by default, it would solve a huge number of problems. So just that one little step is probably the best thing that you can do right now to solve the fraud problem for you, or to step into solving that fraud problem. There's other bigger things. I think there's great technologies out there, and I think some of the stuff that Andrew was talking about, I love the postcard idea. I think that's a cool one. Uh, I don't even know where to find a fax machine. I guess you have to go to FedEx, Kinko's, or whatever to do that. But I love like taking it analog to beat the digital guys. I dig that. So um, anyway, it's a fun conversation. Love it.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you guys both
excellent.
for
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. We are back at this on May 20th, 1 p.m. Eastern time. That is a Wednesday. We are going to talk about going from SEO to AIO. So what is the plan? How do you take employer branding and make it something that is AI optimized, not just search engine optimized? Just so you guys know, cheat code on that, answer optimization is the answer. We're joined by James Ellis, who is one of my favorite branding guys, and he is truly phenomenal. And I never say Alex's name right. Alex, you're going to have to help me. Alexander Tchaikovsky, who is who is absolutely phenomenal. He is an AI job board guy. He speaks all over Europe about what's happening in AI, what's happening on job boards, and so forth. And so I think he will be a phenomenal addition. So please join us. I'm very excited to see you all back next month. Thank you.
Take care.
Hey guys, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.